It's in Mark chapter 15, and we're going to be in verse number 42 starting. So we're getting close to the end of the book of Mark here. And this little section had a big impact on me this week as I was reading through it. So oftentimes, I don't name sermons, I don't title sermons, I just put Mark chapter 15, verse 42 through whatever. But this week as I was reading, I just thought, man, this really speaks to me in a real way, and I think that I titled the sermon this week early, which again is weird for me. Normally I'm posting it on YouTube trying to think, what should I call this thing so that I can post it on YouTube? But this week I thought this is really a great example of doing hard things in hard times. Doing hard things in hard times. I'm about to say something super profound, you guys, so be ready for it. Doing hard things is hard. I know, write it down, quote me on it, right? But that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but doing hard things is hard. But I think most of us have experienced that doing hard things becomes infinitely harder whenever you're doing them in the midst of hard times. For example, it's really easy to stand up to your boss and say what he's asking you to do is not right, is unethical, isn't going to work for you whenever you've got money in the bank and everything's going pretty good and the job market is solid and you know that you could go out and get another job tomorrow if you needed to. It's a lot harder to do that whenever the job market is soft and you don't have a penny to your name, but it's still the right thing to do. Doing hard things in hard times. And I always love to find great illustrations from history and from just different stories of people who have kind of accomplished the things that we're talking about. And there's a billion of them. There's seriously so many stories about people who have done hard things in hard times. But probably one of the ones that's most impactful for me is a story that pretty much nobody knows because it's a personal story for me. It's a story of my mom. My mom who, for the vast majority of my life, has been in a wheelchair. She has MS, and whenever I was in the 6th grade, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and pretty quickly after that, she was confined to a wheelchair, at least mostly, and then almost totally confined to a wheelchair. And you might say that's a hard time. And especially my mom was always super active. She had been an all-state athlete in track all throughout her high school career and never saw this thing coming. And it came on the heels, actually, like literally 1 year after my dad was declared cancer-free was whenever she was diagnosed with having multiple sclerosis. It was a hard time for her. It was a hard time for all of us, but specifically for her. But I remember as the years went on and she started to degrade and not be able to walk as well and not be able to walk as far and then to be in a wheelchair, I remember a specific instance that I saw numerous times. We would be at church. And as we were there at church and my dad would pull her wheelchair up to the end of the pew, we were going to a church that still had pews, not like here where we have chairs, right? But it still had pews, so we'd pull it up to the end of the pew and she would kind of scoot over into the pew and worship would begin. And this woman who was unable to stand by herself would grab onto the rail of the pew in front of her to stand up during worship. And she would stand up sometimes for the span of half a song. Sometimes she would make it most of the way through a song. But she would stand holding onto the pew as worship was being sung before she would sit down. That was a hard thing. But she felt like at that moment, that was the way that she could continue to give praise to God. Even in the midst of her difficult circumstance, even in the midst of her hard situation, she would stand up, seeing her knuckles turn white and her arms tremble as she stood up for that moment in worship. She did a hard thing in a hard time. And again, like I said, we could look out throughout history and we could see many, many examples of people who did hard things, who made the hard call, who did the right thing even though it was difficult in the midst of a hard situation. And today we're going to see that happen. If you have been following with us, and if not, basically we've been going through the march to the cross of Jesus here over the last several weeks, from his experience in the upper room that Oliver shared with us today, where he was spending time with his disciples at the Last Supper, to his prayers in the garden, to the betrayal and the mock trial before the Sanhedrin, to now the mock trial before Pilate, and then his scourging, the mocking, the beating, the carrying the cross and stumbling, unable to carry the load himself, all the way up to last week, seeing the crucifixion and the death of Jesus. And now we're going to see a man, a minor known character in the Bible, maybe somebody who you haven't really heard very much about. But we come to him in the book of Mark chapter 14, starting in verse number 42. And when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, took courage and went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. So we see here Jesus has been crucified. He has now died on the cross. We remember that word of the centurion who was standing close by and said, "Surely this must be the Son of God." And he breathed out his last. Jesus is now dead, hanging on the cross. And there is a man in the crowd, a man who we haven't heard about at all in the biblical narrative up until this point. His name is Joseph of Arimathea. Joseph is a super common Hebrew name. It's almost like saying, "Oh, this is John, this is Bill, this is Bob." Super, super common name as we look at this man who now plays a very pivotal role. We get an interesting piece of information here, and it says that he was a member, a respected member of the council. Whenever it says the council, it's talking specifically about the Sanhedrin, which is the same body who, less than a day ago, had falsely convicted Jesus of blasphemy and sentenced him to death. Talk about a hostile work environment for a guy who is following after Jesus, right? We know a little bit more about Joseph of Arimathea from the other Gospels as well. We know from Matthew's Gospel that he was a disciple of Jesus. He wasn't just someone who was a bystander, but he was someone who had followed the teachings of Jesus. As we look at the book of John, we see that he had, with Nicodemus, another member of the council who we know well, was the one who would bury Jesus here in this chapter. And we know from the book of Luke that it said that he was an upright and righteous man who did not go along with the council's decision to convict Jesus. So we have this man, he has just watched Jesus, his rabbi, his teacher, the one who he was hoping would restore all things in Israel. He was waiting and hoping for the kingdom of God, and now he has just watched Jesus, the man who he thought, this is the guy, this is the one, and this is the time. It's finally going to happen. What I've been waiting for my whole life is finally going to come to fruition, and it's going to be through this man, Jesus. And he watches him from a very short period of time go from the hope of Israel to, in his mind now, railroaded, falsely accused, beaten, mocked, spat upon, crucified, and killed. It's a hard time for a follower of Jesus. It's a hard time for a man who was part of the system that convicted Jesus to death. It's a hard time for a man who was looking for the kingdom of God to come. But we see that even during this difficult time, Joseph of Arimathea, who had seen Jesus railroaded through, who had now watched Jesus die, prepared himself to do the hard thing. We read that he took courage and went to Pilate to ask for the body of Jesus. So, why would it take courage to ask for the body of Jesus? Well, a number of reasons. Number one, as we already stated, this was now going to mark him as a follower of Jesus. Again, the book of Luke tells us that he had followed Jesus in secret up to this point, that he had listened to his teachings, that he was a disciple of Jesus, but he was not outwardly open with it to the Sanhedrin. This act of going and asking for the body of Jesus would squarely put him in the camp of followers of Jesus with his peers and his colleagues. Basically, we might call it today career suicide. it's a really tough situation where he's saying, if I do this, I am going to put myself in the situation where I am going to wreck my career, where right now I am a respected member of the council, but after this, that respect might be out the window. Right now, I'm a respected member of the council, but in just a moment, I'm going to be associated with the man who they hate, who they despised, and who they just killed. I'm going from a place of respect and honor to putting myself in danger. That's one of the reasons. The second reason that it took courage for him to do this was because of the normative Roman practice of crucifixion. You see, crucifixion was not just to provide the ultimate level of torture for the victim, but it was also to provide a clear message for anybody else who might seek to stand up against Rome. And so what the Romans loved to do was once they crucified someone, they would not immediately take them down from the cross. They would like to leave them up there for days, even after they were dead, so that the carrion birds and the vultures could come and pick at their flesh, so that everybody who walked by this hill where they could see from a distance these people hung on the cross would see that this is what happens when you defy Rome. This is what happens whenever you stand up against the Roman government. And now, Joseph of Arimathea is going to have to go and petition Pilate to release the body of a man who is now a convicted insurrectionist against the nation of Rome, to him who is not even a family member. That's why he needed courage. He was not only possibly throwing away the respect that he had among his peers in his career, but he was also about to go and face a public official who could very well be hostile towards what he was trying to do. But yet, he continued because he was not afraid to do the hard thing in the hard time. So we read now in verse number 44 that Pilate was surprised to hear that he should have died already, and summoning the centurion, he asked whether he was already dead. And when he learned from the centurion that he was, he granted the corpse to Joseph. So now Joseph goes and he has favor with the Lord, and the first thing that Pilate asks is, he's really dead? You see, crucifixion was a slow and agonizing process, and it often took people a considerable amount of time, hours and hours, to pass away because they were literally slowly suffocating, slowly asphyxiating under the weight of their own body. But Jesus had already passed away. So quickly, in fact, that Pilate was surprised, and so he sends for the centurion to make sure, absolutely sure, that Jesus truly is dead. And this is an important point. This is why the burial of Jesus is an important point of the story. Sometimes it kind of just gets glossed over. It's like Jesus died and he rose again. And yes, that's the truth. But whenever we look at Paul's words in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 and 4, he emphasizes also the importance of the burial of Jesus Christ. We read in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 4, "For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he raised on the third days in accordance with the Scripture." Whenever Paul is relating the gospel story, he says, he died, and just to make sure that you guys know that he was really dead, they buried him. They put him in the grave, and from the grave he rose again. It's important to remember that, and Mark emphasizes this point here, both with two different things. So you might hear people, there's a theory out there that says, well, Jesus never actually died, that he was revived whenever they laid him into the tomb because it was nice and cool down there, and so he was able to just get up out of the tomb and just kind of walk out. There's obviously a lot of different issues with that. The One of the first being that we remember that Jesus couldn't even carry the beam to his own cross because he had had so much loss of blood. And so then after, again, having been crucified and having been stabbed in the side, he just woke up and said, oh, hey, I guess you don't need blood. That's awesome. Like, no, that wasn't the way that it worked. This was a miraculous work of God that took place here. And Mark wants us to know this for sure. And it says, not only did the centurion confirm that Jesus had indeed died, but notice the word that he uses when it said, and Pilate granted him the corpse or the body. Again, that's just a graphic picture. The Son of God, perfect and spotless, lived an entire life without sin, and now his lifeless body is given over to Joseph. If the reality didn't set in for him at that point, it must have set in for him whenever he saw the body. I remember for me it was a similar situation whenever my brother passed away, that it was almost a surreal situation. He was 24 at the time, so young. Everything was just crazy, trying to get all of the different arrangements made for the funeral and everything. And it wasn't until that moment when I walked into the room and I placed my hand on his body that it really all came to me, that was a real situation. And so I can't imagine Joseph, again, this man who was a disciple of Jesus, who had followed him, who was now risking his career and even his life to go before Pilate and request this body, and now he receives the body of Jesus. And again, the one who had hoped that he might see the kingdom of God sees before him the man in whom he put his hope dead. I think I can say unequivocally, it's a hard day. And I think many of us have experienced days that we would say are hard days. And maybe not just days, maybe weeks, months, entire seasons, years. We've experienced, many of us in our lives, times that are just hard. And whenever we move into hard seasons, often our first inclination is to just pigeonhole and say, everything else is already hard. I don't want to have to make any more hard choices. You ever felt that way? You ever felt like everything that's going on around me is already just difficult enough? Do I really still have to continue to make the hard choice? Do I really have to continue to do the right thing? Do I really still have to continue to do hard things in the midst of hard times? I'm sure Joseph probably thought something like that. It's hard. It's hard to see the one that you put your hope in die. But he took courage. And he asked for the body of Jesus. And now it is granted to him. And Joseph bought a linen shroud. And taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud and laid him in a tomb that had been cut out of the rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. And Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. So again, Joseph now finishes this by taking him to his own tomb. Likely a family tomb. That's the way they did it, kind of like we would think of a crypt if you've ever been to a graveyard and you see kind of the little marble building where multiple members of a single family are kind of laid to rest. That's how they used these caves. These caves would be hollowed out. They would be commissioned not for a single individual, but for an entire family. And yet Joseph had this commission thinking, I'll probably die, and then my children, and then my children's children, and they can all be laid to rest here. But before anybody from his family had been laid into this tomb, the first person he lays in there is Jesus. And again, when we look at the book of John, he was there with Nicodemus, the one who had had the earlier interaction with Jesus as well, when Jesus told him, you must be born again. And together they laid Jesus in the tomb and rolled the stone in front of the tomb. The last thing here that comes up in this verse is that Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. We remember that this is not only a hard time for Joseph of Arimathea, it was not only a difficult time for Nicodemus, it was also a difficult time for his disciples. for all of those who had followed him. But we see the differences in the way that people acted during this time and what they did during this difficult season. We know from Scripture that at the garden, whenever the guards came, all of Jesus' disciples scattered, and then Peter followed at a safe distance until they got to the headquarters of the Sanhedrin, where he would be tried there. And we know that Peter, when faced with a hard situation and given a hard choice, denied. We know that pretty much the rest of his disciples all ran and hid and locked themselves away, fearing that at any moment the authorities could come for them. But we know that there were some who continued to follow Jesus even in spite of the danger. And we know that there were many women from Galilee who had followed Jesus, and they were there at the foot of the cross. We know from the book of John that John the disciple was there at the foot of Jesus' cross as he was being crucified. And I think it's just worth pointing out here that anybody who would say that the Bible or Christianity is an anti-woman book or an anti-woman religion should probably tell Mark that. Because over and over again, we see specifically that he mentions that these women are not hiding and pigeonholing as the disciples are, but instead they are following after Jesus. They are trying to figure out where he is laid. They are the ones who are taking the risks as well to associate themselves with Jesus. But in the midst of this, again, we see people taking different tacks. We see people, some following at a distance. We see others drawing close. We see others hiding in fear. What do we do whenever life gets hard? Because the first point and the first thing that I want to point out is that life will get hard. It is inevitable. And I know that that's not something that we like to hear. You're like, great, that's a cheery message, Pastor. Thanks a lot, right? But life will get hard. Jesus said it himself, in this world you will have troubles. There are going to be things in this life that are going to overwhelm us. There are going to be seasons of life where things are just going to be rough. It's a guarantee. Things are going to get hard in this life. So what is our reaction whenever things get tough? As we look at more examples, I think probably one of the greatest examples that we can look at of people who stood strong and made hard choices in the midst of hard decisions comes in the book of Daniel, chapter number 3. And it's the three who we often call the three Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. To give a little bit of backstory, just in case you don't know the story, is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were Hebrews. They were part of the nation of Israel, and the nation of Israel had now been captured and were now under the authority of the Babylonian Empire. Their entire homeland, they had taken it. They had destroyed the temple. They had destroyed the palaces. Only the very poorest of the poor were left in the land to tend for the fields, and everybody else was taken up wholesale and brought to Babylon and settled there. These three Hebrew children were then taken and put into forced service of the king. And as they were in this forced service, the king of Babylon decided that he was going to erect a giant golden statue of himself. Talk about narcissism. Right? So, and he said, I'm going to erect this giant golden statue of me, and every day we're going to play music. And every day when that music plays, all of you, everybody in the entire kingdom has to stop whatever they're doing, and they have to bow down, and they have to worship this giant golden statue of me. And from what we know about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were most likely very young men at this point. They were people who had been taken from their homeland and now transplanted into a hostile foreign land. They were completely at the beck and call of the rulers of Babylon, specifically the king of Babylon, and now he was commanding them to bow down and worship this idol. I think you could say they were in a hard time, and they had a hard choice to make. But for them, the choice was easy. And they say this in the book of Daniel, chapter number 3, verse number 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. When faced in a hard season of life with a hard choice, do we bow down and worship? Do we just say, yeah, God, I'm just going to do this, but I'm not really worshiping. This is just an act. Or do we stand strong for what we actually believe? And we remember that at this point, the king had already threatened them, and he said, listen, if you do not bow, I'm going to give you another chance. I'm going to give you another chance. We're going to play the music again. And if you bow, great. You get to keep your positions. You get to keep everything. Everything goes back to normal, and we'll act like this never happened. But if you don't, I have a furnace. And I'm going to put a fire in that furnace. And I'm going to crank it up. And I'm going to put you in there and burn you alive. And again, that answer from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is so bold. They say, we don't even need to answer you. We've already told you our answer. We're not going to do it. Our God is able to save us from this burning fiery furnace. But you know what? Even if he doesn't, make sure you know, O king, we will not bow down and worship this idol. I would say that that's a great example of doing a hard thing in a hard season. And we know from the biblical account there in the rest of Daniel chapter 3 that God honored their faithfulness. He honored the fact that they made that hard choice in that hard situation. And I love the picture that we get there in Daniel chapter 3, because as we see that the 3 Hebrew children are thrown into the fiery furnace, and it's stoked up 7 times hotter. In fact, the people who went to throw them in the furnace died before they could even get to the door of the oven because it was so hot. And yet, as Nebuchadnezzar from his exalted throne looks down and looks into the fire, what does he see? He sees 3 people walking around unbound. Oh, but wait, there's also a 4th, and he is like the Son of God. Whenever we do hard things in hard situations, what helps us to get through is that we know that we do not do them alone. We do not do difficult things alone. Whenever we are believers, whenever we are called by the name of the Lord, everything that we do, even the most difficult things in the most difficult seasons, we do them with the Lord. He lifts us up. He holds us up. By the power of his Holy Spirit working through us, he continues to empower us, embolden us, and to guide us. We do not do them alone. Hard times will come. It's a certainty. But doing hard things with the Lord makes them possible. Even in the midst of the worst situations, because we have the Lord, it makes them possible. And this is important because I've heard this saying before, and I hate this saying. And maybe you've heard it before too. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. Have you ever heard that saying? Yeah. The only problem is it's a lie. Because sometimes tough times do last. You could talk to many, many people who never thought that the season that they were going through could possibly last as long as it did. You could talk to people who said, oh yeah, this is going to be over in a week. Okay, maybe it's going to be over in a month. Okay, maybe it's going to be over in a year. Okay, maybe it's going to be over in 20 years and 20 years down the road, and it's still tough. Sometimes tough times do last. And then the second part of that is also wrong, because tough people do. Because let me tell you, I have seen some people who I would say are some of the toughest people that I have known, who are physically and mentally tough, that they're like, I can do it. They have great willpower. Their sheer strength of will has caused them to do amazing things in life. And yet whenever they are put under the crushing weight of this world, if they try to do it by themselves, they fail. I've seen tough people, strong people, powerful people, confident and competent people go through this life, and when they try to do hard things by themselves, they're crushed under the weight. Tough times don't last, but tough people do. I'm sorry, but that's not true. But the truth is, sometimes, even if tough times last, you have a God that has overcome all of them. And if you put your trust in Him, if you rest in Him, if you wait on Him, if you abide in Him, He will bring you through. Because this world will do everything it can to crush us, to make us lose hope, to cause us to despair. But the Lord wants to hold us up. The Lord wants to help us to make it through. The Lord wants to fight our battles for us if we'll be patient and wait on Him. I've often shared my definition of humility before, but I think of it again in this specific situation, that humility is not saying, I can't do this. Humility is saying, I can't do this by myself. And oftentimes whenever we look at different situations, we're tempted to despair and we're tempted to say, I can't do this. I'm unable to do this. I can't. It's too much. And we're tempted to step out of that thing instead of stepping into it and say, okay, Lord, I can't do this without you. I can't do this by myself. I can't do this unless you are here with me. We see the same thing happen to the children of Israel. If you remember in the book of Exodus, the children of Israel made their way from captivity and slavery in Egypt, and they are now making their way to the promised land. But if you know anything about that journey, didn't go so great. You know, if you've ever gone on a road trip with kids and they're in the back saying, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? It was like that, but like 10 times worse, because they kept saying like, God, why did you bring us out here to die? God, I wish I had meat and not just this angel miracle bread that falls from the sky to eat every day. Oh God, why don't we have leeks and onions to eat? Oh God, over and over again, they were just complaining, and they were taking their eyes off from the Lord and taking their eyes onto the situations that were around them. And it came to the point where God spoke to Moses and He said, listen, Moses, if I go up among this people because they are ungrateful, they are unthankful, they are selfish and self-centered, they are not focused on me, I might destroy them. So you go. I'll send my angel with you before you to go into the promised land. You can go and you can conquer and you can have success, but I won't go with you. And something happened in the hearts of the Israelites that day, because they all lamented and began to mourn, and they said, no, we will not go unless you go with us. We will not go one step further. We will not move one more inch unless you go with us. And that's the attitude that we must have if we're going to overcome the difficult things in this life. Not, I got this, I'm tough, I can make it work, I've got the skills that I need, I've got money in the bank, I've got everything that I need to be able to solve this situation that's in front of me. Because again, most of us have probably experienced times whenever all of the resources and all of the right mindsets and all of the right money in the bank and everything else didn't solve the problem, and it was still tough. And it was still hard. So what do? We call out to God and we say, God, go before me. God, go with me. God, you have to do this. It has to be you, because it cannot be me. Doing hard things will always be hard, but we never do them alone. Whenever we go through hard situations, it has to be our first cry to call out to the Lord, because He's the only one who can sustain us through all of life's troubles and trials, through all of life's woes. We have to throw ourselves fully and totally onto the Lord. As we get ready to close out today, I want to just again put ourselves in the shoes of the different people that were around Jesus at the time of his death. It was a hard day for everybody. Every single one of them were experiencing the same event. It was hard for them all in different ways. They all experienced it in unique and different nuances of the way that they handled it in their own emotions, but still they all experienced the same event. The person who they had placed their hope in, the person who they had placed their trust in, the person who they were waiting on to bring the kingdom of God now laid dead before them. Some ran and hid. They locked themselves away from the world and they said, we're just going to turn off the lights, we're going to lock the doors, and we're going to hope the problem goes away. Some of us have probably been there, right? Have you ever just kind of felt like that? Like you just want to turn off the lights, you just want to cover up in bed, turn on a Netflix show and just say, maybe in 2 or 3 days the problem will be gone, maybe eventually the problem will be gone and I won't have to deal with it. But then those 2 or 3 days go by and what happens? It's still there. The situation's still hard. It's still tough. Some chose to hide, to lock the door, and to say, we're just going to hope that things get better. Others chose to continue to follow after Jesus till the very end, like these women did, like the Apostle John did, to follow Jesus all the way up to the end, to continue to follow him, to say, I'm just going to continue to chase after you. And Joseph of Arimathea again, who had in many of the easy times hidden his discipleship and his devotion to the Lord, had hidden away the fact that he was a follower of Jesus. Now, whenever things got hard, he had a decision to make. Do I continue to hide? Do I continue to shirk my responsibility as a disciple? Do I continue to just live this private life over here but not let anybody in public know what I'm doing? And he made the hard choice, and he did the hard thing, even though it could cost him dearly. Even though it could have cost him his reputation, even though it could have cost him his job, even though it could have cost him his very life to go before Pilate, he did the hard thing in the hard time. And because of that, we know his name. Because of that, his name was written in Scripture. Because of that, he was praised throughout the Gospels as the man who did the hard thing at the hard time. So what about you? Maybe right now times aren't hard for you. Maybe right now times are easy and good for you. As we said earlier, hard times are inevitable. Maybe it's not right now. Maybe it's a week down the road. Maybe it's 2 weeks down the road. Maybe it's a year down the road. But hard times will eventually come in your life. And how will you handle it when those hard times come? Maybe you're in the midst of a difficult time right now. Maybe right now life is tough. Those hard situations are fully upon you and you are trying to make it through and you're trying to figure out what life even is at this moment. Can I remind you that you don't have to do this alone? And in fact, you can't do it alone. Would you call out to the Lord, who is gracious, who is rich in mercy, who is abounding in steadfast love, who waits to show you mercy, who waits to be gracious to you? Whenever we go through hard times, and we will we make the hard decisions? Will we continue to move in the right direction? Will we continue to do what is required of us? Will we continue to do what is right when it is hard and when everything around us is hard? C.S. Lewis put it this way, that the Lord has ordained that he will bring you through this life, not without pain, but without stain. In this life, we will have pain. In this life, things will be difficult. In this life, we will struggle and we will suffer. But if we cling on to the Lord, if we continue to hold on to the Lord, he will bring us through this life, even through the pain, even through the struggle, without stain. That is his ultimate goal for us. As we close, I just want to share one final illustration with you to think about. I've read a story about a woman who was lost at sea. She was in a sailing ship. They were sailing out in the middle of the ocean, and somehow she was hit with the mast whenever the wind took a turn, and she blew off the ship, and she was in the water. And unfortunately, because this happened at night, it was many, many hours before they realized what had happened. They sent out a Coast Guard beacon, and the Coast Guard began to circle planes, and they circled them for days and days. And finally, it had been 4 days, and they assumed all hope is lost. All hope has to be lost. There's no way that this woman could have survived in the open sea for 4 days. And as they were getting ready to call off the search plane flew over, and they saw a buoy shaking violently in a calm sea. And seeing that, they were amazed, and so they swooped down, and to get a closer look, they saw a woman clinging on to this buoy in the middle of the ocean. And as she clung to it, she was shaking it, trying to get the attention of the search plane. They made a true observation that if she had been out in the ocean by herself, she surely would have died. But because she clung to the buoy, she survived. In our lives, this world will seek to shipwreck us, to drown us, to undo all in our lives. And when that happens, and when we find ourselves tossed and torn and thrown, would we cling on to the one thing that means safety? Would we cling on to the one person who can get us through? Would we cling on to the one safety in the midst of all of life's storms? Would we hold fast to the Lord? Will you pray with me?